Welcome back, everyone. This is John, without the H, from CNRC. Today I'm going to go over something that I've neglected to, but sorely needed to cover, which is the JAS-39 Gripen from Freewing, 80mm. Beautiful model. Mine has flown, must be on its 400th flight by this point. It has seen some stuff by this point. Mine's a bit of a custom job. I've done some things to it to extend its service life. It currently flies exclusively on pavement. The mounts for the landing gear have become so damaged from flying on grass that I just don't feel like paying for a new model, so I continue just flying it off pavement like I do with most of my jets now. Once you go pavement, I feel like you just don't go back. No matter how well maintained the grass field is, it's just so nice to have pavement to work with. So let's go ahead and get this started by getting the plane connected and started up. And I will go over the setup, the type of radio that I'm using, different mixing values, and antenna orientation, all that fun stuff we all like to talk about in these setup videos. First and foremost, let's go ahead and get the battery in place. As always, I will split this into conveniently bite-sized chapters so that you are able to easily view it at your own convenience. Okay, let her initialize. First thing you're going to notice is the initialization is not the typical Freewing beep sound. That is because I have replaced the 100 amp Freewing unit, the ESC, with a 100 amp Spektrum Avian. That was done so that I could have reverse thrust and have more control over the servo torque. The servos that I'm using are my standard AGF RC units, the B11 DLS servos. They retail for about $20 a pair on Amazon currently. They have more torque than the stock units. They have more range of motion, and to be honest with you, they just sound way better. So in regards to how this plane's designed, it's set up as an Elevon, aircraft type. It is Elevon A because of the way this is set up. I also, because I'm using an iX20, have set it up to have canards. The canard is actually programmed into the receiver. I put it back to normal tail type. That was done so that I could have the canards function independently for advanced mixing that you'll see later on. Spektrum wing types are great, but unfortunately they do limit you in some regards, and I will go over that later on as we get further into this setup video. So let's start by looking at the Elevons. You'll see that, well, let me turn the radio back on.
Turbine disengaged.
I say turbine because I think it just sounds cooler. I get a very large amount of up and down with the custom servo arms that I put into these. And you might even notice that I also get a very large amount of up and down travel on my canards. I have had people tell me on the Motion RC customer community on Facebook that I'm going to strip the servos by flying it like this. However, what people do fail to remember is that I don't fly like this all the time. I use Expo, and I use a lot of it. So most of my stick movements are actually within the normal range of the canard movement, and they only move all the way up when the plane is already moving at slow speed to begin with. So say I'm coming out of the top of a loop, or I am in the middle of attempting to stall it, or just to see how much additional deflection I can get. So having that full range of travel is critical for the scale performance of this model, and I'll get into that in just a moment. So to document how this plane is functioning and move into the mixing, let's go ahead and start that chapter, getting into mixing. Let's get the landing gear out, and you'll see where most of my mixing takes place. So emulating flight control computers, which is something I've been doing with all of my jets lately, when the landing gear are out, the travel of all surfaces is significantly reduced. I believe I also have, I have the first mix I'm going to talk about is my anti pull up the gear while the ground, I like the aircraft's still on the ground switch. So if my throttle cut's engaged, I have it set to disable the movement of my gear. So you can actually see just how far the Canards are traveling and the elevons are traveling when the gear is in up and when the gear is in down. So it's been limited severely in how far it can possibly travel. This is to prevent over control during a critical flight phase, which landing and takeoff, let's be fair, just like real aviation, most crashes and most accidents happen during landing and takeoff. That is when you want the most control, and also when you want the least amount of jankiness from your controls. You want to have nice, smooth stick movements. If you've ever watched an airline pilot on YouTube when they're flying, when the gear and the flaps are deployed, if this was a yoke, you would see them doing this full extent of the sticks. They're constantly fighting it as hard as they can to get it to do, to compensate for turbulence or to compensate for crosswinds, because they have limited control surface movements in that particular mode. That is to prevent the plane from stalling as easily and prevents the human element from causing a problem with the control of the aircraft. So you can emulate that by tying your rates to your gear like I have, or you can put it on a different switch. I just prefer it to be in my gear, so I don't even have to think about it. So for example, I fly with 150% rates, so 47% of 150% is 70%. I also fly with 50% expo in this rate. This is on all surfaces except for the rudder. The rudder never changes, it's always at 85%. This is so I never over control the nose gear, and it is also so I never over control the rudder. Rudder in jets is good when you're attempting to do slow speed handling. It is terrible when you are going high speed. You will put the plane, many of these planes, except for the Viper jet 90mm up there, you will put almost any one of these other jets, like the airliner, the F-15, the F-16, and the Gripen here, will all go into snap rolls when you start trying to use too much rudder. You cannot power your way out of it with aileron. I have tried using counter aileron to push the wing back up, and it still slides all the way through in snap rolls. So having my rudder at 85% generally prevents me from over controlling while I'm on the ground. The drifting video that you may have seen recently notwithstanding, of course. So that's the first mix. I also have a takeoff mix. So let's go ahead and show how that works.
Takeoff mode.
That's set to a flight mode. This is one of the only models where I've actually used flight modes. I am going to get into it more later, but I just like the technical aspect of moving switches around, and I feel like I have more precise control over when and why certain things happen. In this model, it's a very simple setup, and it only needs to do a few things. So in takeoff mode, emulating the way the real Gripen flies, when I reach critical, takeoff speed, or what I assume is takeoff speed, because I don't actually have a speedometer in here, only the Canards can move in my takeoff mode. So they can go down a little bit, and they can only move up. So what generally ends up happening here is as I lift the Canards, and again, only the Canards move in this mode, what happens is it lifts the nose onto the rear wheels, or, and it lifts them up above the rear wheels is what I mean to say. And then the plane ascends and climbs in a more natural scale-like fashion, very much like the real jet does. If you watch Gripen takeoff videos on YouTube, there's a video of them flying from, I think it's Nellis Air Force Base in Nevada. You'll see them lift up the nose, and then they gently lift up a few moments after. You can get a very similar effect by limiting the elevons so they don't move on the pitch axis when you go to take off. After I've landed, I also have an air brake mode. Again, similar to the real Gripen. Let's move this forward a little bit so that they don't catch.
Air brake mode.
This is set to be on a timer. It slows them down. They deploy as far down as they can possibly go. This is also set to disable my pitch movement, so when I'm down on the ground, I'm stuck there. You can change that however you'd like to do it. However, for the purposes of how I fly, once I'm down on the ground, I don't see myself getting back up, so it's staying down one way or the other.
Takeoff mode.
The air brake mode can only activate when the gear are out. It cannot activate in midair. So if I was to put the gear back up, actually I can't put them up because of the switch. So
Cruise mode.
none of the other modes can activate. It's always in cruise mode currently, even though the gear is still out. So that's the majority of the technical mixing on this aircraft. The Canard travel and the Elevon travel may seem excessive, but I've done some amazing flights with this plane with all of the control authority that I have. It is a true axiom that when you have all the control authority you can possibly get, using Exponential on your controller to limit how far it can move will let you use it when you need it. So if you go full stick back and you're moving slowly, you'll have way more pitch control than you would if you didn't have that authority to begin with. It is something that I use in all my planes. Everything I fly gets the most deflection it can possibly get. I've never had, out of thousands of flights over the past year, any issue with control surface failures from overextension. Now I have stripped some servos in the wings of my Timber X from doing crankshafts at high speed, but that's to be expected. I mean, they're not the best servos in the world, but if you do a crankshaft with a $10 servo, you know, chances are you might end up stripping it, even if it's metal geared. That's some serious torque and some serious G-force you're applying to them. This jet is flying on the same servos I've flown for months. I've never actually had to replace the servos in this model. The ones in the Elevons I was going to put into the F-16, but the stabilators in the F-16 are currently using were in here for like 6 months, and they work flawlessly. I had no problem putting them into my new model. I wasn't even worried about it. All right, so let's go into mixing, and let's go over the discussion of how everything works. First and foremost, let's take a look inside of the model so you can see how it's laid out. You'll notice that you don't see my receiver, but you will see that I have antennas coming out of the little battery slots for the strap. The battery strap slots, that's what I'm saying. This is a Spektrum AR8360T receiver. When I got it, it retailed for like 110. It's gone up a little bit in price since then. This one has a full altimeter, so you can
minus 1.8 feet.
You can get altitude readouts and just reset it so it doesn't think that it's too low. Because I'm using the Avian ESC, I do have the full smart telemetry in here, so I do get my voltage info directly from my receiver, from my receiver and my ESC. So I can tell exactly how hot the, whatever the FET stands for, I can't remember offhand. The battery elimination circuit is at 82 degrees, Fahrenheit of course. It tells me the RPM of the model. It tells me exactly how many amps the model is pulling. It tells me how many amps the BEC is pushing out. Let's see if it actually will tell me how many amps it's pushing under load if I hold a Canard down. I guess it only does it when the throttle's throttled up a little bit. It's good info to have. That could also just be the amps of the motor itself. No, actually there's a motor. No, it's two different things. Okay, regardless, let's move on. It's nice to have the ability to get my battery call out whenever I need to know it. If I'm flying a smart pack, which I do have a few of them, I can find out what my individual cells are, which I find very useful. I do have reverse thrust. It doesn't do a whole lot except for kick up the clay here, but it sounds awesome and looks pretty cool. Okay, get the gear back up. That was just from moving my switch H back to uncut. So I have thrust reverse. That was an unnatural pause there, but I wanted to demonstrate what it sounded like versus when it reversed. It makes an unholy racket when it's going full thrust. Listen to this. So it does shoot some air out of the front, but most of it goes to the ground, so it doesn't have a whole lot of braking authority. Most of the braking on pavement for this plane is going to come from my air brakes. I've had people tell me when they saw the Griffin's drifting video, they told me, I believe the exact word was, I use too much control authority. My throws are too high. That's why I drifted. The only reason why I drifted in that video was because I was overcompensating with the rudder. I was going too fast and I wasn't pointed straight down the runway. I have a very narrow street on which I'm flying in that subdivision that's being built. So if I overcompensate for any reason, the plane will easily tip. It's a tricycle gear. Every tricycle gear plane does it. Even the ones with the widest stance can eventually do it. If you tip them over or you try to compensate at too high of a speed, it's just the way things work. It's all physics. It has nothing to do with throws. All right, so let's get into the mixing. Because this is an iX20 and it does have the ability to program canards, if you're using an iX12 and I believe in NX10 or below, I don't think you can get canard movement. And really, all it does is move the canards upward in safe and in AS3X. So you'll see that my canards are actually maintaining some level flight here, or attempting to. It's actually really neat. It's almost like it has a proper flight control computer in it, but it does not, alas. It is just a simple emulated FCS, like everything else in the Spektrum ecosystem.
AS3X.
But it does at least have AS3X on the canards, so it does compensate for pitch in addition to the elevons. Because the canards are canards and they're forward of the center of gravity, they don't have as much of an effect on stability as you might think. They do have a significant amount, but I've tried flying this plane only with canards and only with the pitch coming from canards, and it's nothing like the amount of control you get from the elevons. So that is also one of the reasons why my mixing is set the way that it is, and why I have what looks like extra exponential on the canards. You can see that the elevons are actually moving more than the canards are. And that's because I programmed in a curve mix on the canards so that they move less up to a certain point and then they move to their full extension, so that I keep, like when I'm normally flying, I only move this much. And if I really need to have the entire stick, I have it, but it's not something that I always use. And I don't want to have a situation where I over control and the canards cause it to slip around a turn, or perhaps cause the wings to stall earlier than they should. Because for those who are aware, canards do actively act as a regulator of airflow over the wing. So generally speaking, you want them to only move so much, but not so much that they're going to deflect air away from the wing. Like for example, moving to this point can actually cause it to prevent airflow from hitting the center of the wing, which would cause it to potentially stall earlier. But you guys know me and you've seen enough of my videos to know that I don't care, and I just want to see what these planes are possibly capable of doing. So let's go through the mixing. On this one, again, I have a flight control computer emulated mix is what I call it. It's throttle to my gain channel, which is auxiliary 5. Now let's go ahead and take a look at how this actually works, and I will show you in forward programming.
Turbine disengaged.
I've been told earlier that I should be talking about the receiver programming settings too, which is correct. I apologize for missing that in my other videos, but it's all pretty simple stuff, and we'll go over that right now. So in flight mode 3, which is AS3X, my roll is 50%, my pitch is 70, and my yaw is 75. I could actually stand to go a little bit higher on pitch and yaw, but that's okay, and not something we need to discuss too much right now. If we go to capture gyro gains, again, this is all relative gain, you will see what's actually happening here. Remember how it said 50 roll, but now it says 21? That's because my throttle stick controls how much gain I have. It's a crude system that emulates how a real flight control computer stabilizes at all airspeeds. So as my throttle goes up, making sure that throttle cuts on, I get to 30 roll at roughly like landing throttle, and then once I get past that point to mid throttle, it drops to 21.
20 seconds.
And then when I get to full throttle, my roll control drops to 15. Likewise, for pitch and yaw, they drop just as much as the roll did.
30 seconds.
This prevents wobbling at various airspeeds for the most part. Now, if I'm coming out of a dive and I go to throttle down to like landing speed, which is about 15 to 20% of my throttle that I've programmed in, the plane will do this. And you've seen it in some of my videos, like the F-15 Maiden. It started wobbling because I was in my landing thrust configuration. So let's do a demonstration of what different, like for example, let's demonstrate how it actually looks at 15 gain versus like no thrust gain.
1 minute.
So at full speed, it's barely moving. And it goes for up and down as well. Okay. At 21 roll and 29 pitch and 31 yaw, which is no throttle, you can see the rudder kind of compensates a little bit. Same with the elevons and pitch and roll with the Canards. So they do have a bit more of an effect, but nothing too overbearing. I did notice this plane is very sensitive to the yaw or the roll axis in AS3X. I assume anybody using a different stabilization system can probably tell you the same thing. If you don't have this thing set up just right throughout its entire flight envelope, you will get some serious wing rock from it. And I think a lot of people misconstrue that as being a design of the Delta wing. It's more just the gains aren't set correctly. That is what this mixing tends to alleviate. Okay, so that's all we really need to cover on that. Moving on in the mixing, let's go on to my elevator to flap flight mode. Elevator to flap and elevator AX2 refers to the Canards. One of them just moves up, the other one moves down. In flight mode 1, which is my cruise mode, okay, we have a movement at point 2, which is negative 15 causes it to move up 5. Okay, so when I pull what would normally be negative 15, it actually moves the Canards up 5 units of movement. And then it continues to get more and more. Say we get to 60 or negative 65, it becomes 51. At negative 100, it moves to negative 100. And that would refer to 150, essentially. So let's actually look and see what that looks like. Again, keeping in mind that I'm running 150% rates. At negative 5, roughly, it's actually negative 10. And I'm sorry, that was the wrong one. At negative 5, it actually is negative 5. At roughly where negative 50, like halfway through the stick is, it's at 60. And then it hits 150%. It moves more than the elevons do, because the way elevon mixing works, it always leaves, if you look at the way they're moving right now, it always leaves a little bit of wiggle room for them to move back and forth. You can program that out by adding a mix to push them even further so that they're always at full deflection when you pull back or push forward. I haven't found it necessary. For those of you who do like to fly this plane with Canards and roll, I have personally tried it both ways. It makes a very ugly roll. I don't know what it is that causes it. I think it's actually it's the difference maybe between the position of the Canards versus the position of the elevons. I see the same thing in my Viper when I use the Tailorons up there, because the elevator is about 4 to 6 inches higher up than the wing is. It does cause a sloppy looking unbalanced roll. So if you like that, because it might look more scale in some regards, then go for it, mix the roll in. If you don't like that and you want a drill-like roll, the way I've got it set with elevons only for roll is what you're looking for. Okay, next up on the list is I believe this is the air brake mode. No, this is the takeoff mode. Okay, so we need to get the gear out for this. Okay, you can see how this is set to function at point 1, which is the furthest out it can possibly be. It has no effect because it never reaches that point. At point number 2, which is the point that it does reach in the lowest rates possible, which is my low rates at 47%, it goes to 100% travel. So these could actually, I think, go even further up, but they don't need to. I'm only really moving the stick about this much, and then the second the plane gets airborne and has positive climb rate, I just let go, and then the gear automatically go up, and then I start maneuvering. So that's really all there is to that. Again, the point number 2 was just determined by trial and error until I saw how far the little dot was moving on here, the cross, whatever you want to call it, the marker, and then setting it so that that was the point, the second point, and then mixing to that so it moved up 100% here. Okay, let's move on to the next flight mode. We're not flight mode yet. Rudder AX3, that's referring to the nose wheel. This is on auxiliary 3. It is being controlled by the rudder. is only working when the gear out, to prevent it from just moving around inside of the plane and doing nothing when rudders activated.
Takeoff mode. Cruise mode.
So you're hearing the modes change because it's also contingent on what position the D switch is and the A switch are in. But you'll see that when the gear are up, the nose wheel goes back to its default position, no matter what my rudder input is. So that's just to prevent it from functioning and doing nothing and taking up even a slight amount of power. I want all the power going directly to the EDF. I don't want it being wasted on useless servos for flight. Okay, next up is, let's take a look at I'm pretty sure I have my air brake mode in here somewhere. I just remembered again that my air brake mode is based on my flap system. So you'll see flight mode 3 controls my flap. This is considered a flap with an elevon mix because the mix has the one elevon controlling the other as a flap, and I'll explain that in a second.
Air brake mode.
The movement of the what do you call it? The flight mode actually causes it to
Cruise mode.
have both of them
Air brake mode. Cruise mode.
move in unison. So let's cover out why that happens. Okay, so that was a flap system that I had to set up to do that, to get it to actually move down slowly. The only other way to do it would have been to go into the servo setup and then change the speed, which would have been more than useless because that would have affected how fast they move. And I don't want them to move up or down in 1 second increments. So let's go down into the mixing again and look at what causes it to link that canard to the other canard and have them both function as one flap unit. That is done by, let's see here, which one of these is it? It should be, just like I said, I wish I could just name these mixes already. It would make this so much easier to make these videos about. Okay, I found it. It was flap to auxiliary 2. Okay, so we have a flap on the left and we have auxiliary 2 on the right. And what this does is it causes the flap to drive auxiliary 2 no matter what. So it will always drive these. And when you go into the flap system and you move something on the left here, say it's the actual primary flap system versus the secondary channels, what happens is when the flap system goes to activate and make the air brake mode, the two canards move as one unit and they're both treated as a flap because they were linked together in this mode.
Cruise mode.
That's how that's done. To prevent the gear from coming back up while you have switch H on throttle cut or any other switch that you've decided to use as throttle cut, that's a really simple mix too, and it's very easy to figure out what it is in this list. It is H to gear, okay? And what that's doing here is a rate of 0 on the top to negative 100%. And that, if you watch the mixing, see how it says 150%?
Turbine engaged.
Okay, so when my throttle cut is off,
Turbine
and then when it's on,
disengaged.
because it moves the gear all the way to 150%,
Gear up.
it can never move to the point where they actually go back up. It prevents them from activating at all. And if you're on the ground and you have throttle cut on and you accidentally hit the switch, not even thinking about it, you won't retract the gear and damage the plane.
Turbine engaged.
I do this for a lot of my jets. I don't want to call it a lifesaver, but a year ago when I was first getting used to jets, I kind of found myself hitting the switch accidentally. And now I don't do it because I have this red switch cover on here and I never forget to activate it. Okay, next up is I have my left trim here, and that is controlling auxiliary 2 and flap. Now again, the reason why it's 2 mixes instead of 1 like it was for the flap system is because it's actually not running the flap channel, it's running just that, it's running the flap channel, but it's not running both as one unit in this mode. It only does that from system-wide actions like the flap system. It's obnoxious. But thankfully the iX20 has 24 mixes, so I have plenty of space to do this. When I had the iX12 and I only had, I think, 12 mixes, I had to be a lot more creative with some of this stuff. Now, if I'm in the air, say I've got a really heavy pack, like a 6000 pack in the nose, what this lets me do is adjust the canards so that I don't have to deal with the elevons. I have the ability to trim the elevons. So if I want to trim them,
54 up.
I can. They're now moving up a little bit. Let's put them back down. But I don't like that because what that does is that would cause the roll to be a little sloppier. It would change the roll axis, and I don't like that. What I do like is the ability to trim the canards.
Canards -10.
Okay, and you'll see that they're both pointing up. And that's amazing because when I'm flying a 6,000 pack, it is very nose heavy. You'll watch in some of the videos, when I take this plane up again with a 6,000, it will start nosing down unless I trim it out. And because the canards are in the front, they are the first line of defense against the nose dropping. So they're actually best suited for that sort of thing. It does make the plane look way better in the air when it's set up like this. Consequently, because I added a crap ton of weight to the tail, I'm talking almost 3 ounces of weight to get the center of gravity to shift from the recommended point here to, here to about right here. I had to, when I go to put a 4,000 pack, which is the recommended pack for this plane, what I was noticing was it would fly around hands off in high alpha the entire time. The damn thing would fly like this. It would just sit there and do that. It would come in to land. It was amazing to watch it, but it was also a little on the unstable side. So you can trim that out by making the canards point downward. Again, this is all flight control computer stuff. If I had an FCS, it would just automatically do it. But because I don't, this is what I have to work with. Okay. I also have my right trim controlling my nose wheel. Let's look at it from this angle instead of looking at it from the front because it blinds me and I really don't want to be blinded right now. So when I push up, it moves to the right.
29.
And when I push down, it moves to the left.
Steering -9. Steering -8.
I believe it was -8 that I had it flying on last time. I find having a trimmable nose wheel to be much easier to adjust than having a plane I have to pick up and constantly adjust with a screwdriver. So let's go over the canard mix real quick one more time, and I'll go over this right after that. I'm only going to look at one because they're both the same. They're just inverted. So left trim to AX2 is what we'll look at here, and it's a rate of 100 to 100, meaning that as it goes up or down, it changes them both in a up or down way. That was probably not a very eloquent way of putting it. What I meant to say was when I go to push up, it moves it up. When I go to push down, it moves it down. It won't just push it up when I push down and then push it up when I push up. If I was to make it -100 and 100, it would do one or the other. This is set to always be on. I also have the trim call out telling me what position the canards are in.
Canard 6. Canard 0.
So I know exactly how much trim I've given them. I find that to be incredibly useful. It's something I just started playing with. It works really well for me. So similar situation with the nose wheel. We have the right trimmer to auxiliary 3. Again, -100, -100. I had to set it that way so pulling down would go left and pushing up would go right. That is always set to be on. Again, you're mixing right trim to AX3 to make that work. If you have a trimmer, this is how you do it. You can also probably do it through flight modes, but if you want a more direct approach, the way I'm doing it does work. Next up, let's get the gear up, and I'll show you a high alpha mix. You may notice that my gear probably move up just a little bit faster than yours do. If you're not using an Avian and you're not using a BEC that kicks out 6 to 7 volts, you're going to get gear that move up a little bit slower. I know that Freewing recommends 5 volts, but on 6 to 7.4, these servos perform the best. They move faster and they have more torque at higher voltage. So that's going to be where I go to. I haven't burned out any one of the retracts doing this yet. Okay, let's show you the high alpha mix. I may still be programming it. It's been a while since I've played with it.
Canard's high alpha.
Okay, so let's show you how this is actually working. As I go to pull the stick back, you'll see the elevons moving up, and to a certain point, the canards will move down. Both of them move to compensate, to push the nose down, to bleed off airspeed, and then get it so that the plane can slow down and get into alpha in confined spaces. If you're one of those people that's fortunate enough to have a giant airfield you can fly around in and do high alpha with and not have to worry about trees or people, I really envy you. You have it really nice. Where I fly lately, and a lot of the other places I go, I don't have a whole lot of time to get up to speed, and I don't have a lot of time to slow down. I either have to slow down or I have to get going, and I have to avoid obstacles. This helps with that. So as I pull my stick back, let's actually open up the mixing and you can see what it's doing. As I pull the stick back, the canards go down up to a certain point, and then they start pulling the nose up a little bit. So right about here is the sweet spot, and I can kind of just pull the elevator stick back and jostle the throttle around a little bit. And if you watch a Gripen doing a high alpha pass, you will see the canards do move like this a lot. They're actually moving up and down to constantly trim the plane. But that's because there's a bunch of sophisticated sensors in there, including angle of attack sensors, airspeed sensors, all sorts of other different sensors that this plane has, more than just a simple gyroscope that tells it how to move the canards and what to do with them at any given point to maximize the amount of airflow going over the wing. But you'll see the real magic from this comes from, as I mentioned earlier, if you may recall, and if you're still listening, the canards are generally considered to primarily be active flow regulators over the wing. So as the plane is moved in front of us here and tilted up into more of an alpha position, so held like this, as I go to pull on the elevator stick, you'll notice that, what's going on here? We're preventing the canards from stalling, or in some cases, perhaps making them stall first, which allows the wing to continue to fly. Or if I'm just talking out of my butt here, it just looks cool and it does actually control the attitude of the plane. And I have found that it works really well. If I can get it to, I need to go up in the air and do some of these maneuvers and test it thoroughly, because I haven't done this in a few months. But what you get is a plane that, as you like start moving the stick around and adjusting with throttle, you get something that looks very much like the real plane. And in some cases, behaves like it, the Reynolds number notwithstanding. Google the Reynolds number if you want a long, in-depth read on what is actually going on between model airplane physics and real or full-scale aircraft physics. There's a lot that goes into it, and this is only scratching the surface. But I do try to bring at least a little bit of aerodynamic knowledge that I've gleaned from other people and from my own research into my models, and I like to share that with you guys, so maybe you can push your models as far as they can go. I know some of you guys are thinking right now, hey, John, how did you get the canards to move so far? That's a good question, and I totally was about to completely forget about it. To show you how to do that, I need to do two things. I need to drop the gear, and I need to go in my bucket of fun over here and pull out the original servo arms that were attached to the canards. I've got a bunch of these things. I've been through so many servos, but I should have what I'm looking for any moment. Here it is, right here. This is the original Canard servo arm, okay? This is what I took out on both canards. I'm gonna put this in my pocket so I don't lose it. Let's flip this upside down. Oh, this also doesn't come with a ventral light, or dorsal light, rather. Pretty sure it's dorsal. It doesn't come with a light on the top. I added that in myself. Okay. You can kind of tell the gear have seen their share of tarmac and grass. I've actually had to Gorilla Glue them in twice now. I'm very proud of this plane. I've had her, again, over 400 flights by this point. She's in pretty remarkably good shape considering how much crap she's flown through. Now, let me go ahead and see if I can get some light in here so you guys can see what it is that I'm talking about. Here we are, flashlight. What I have controlling the canards is a screwed in clevis. I don't know what the actual technical term for that is, or if you can see it as clearly as I do. But I do have both canards on what used to be turbo timber wing, like aileron screw thread adapters. There's a specific term for that. I think it's like Debro quick link connectors. It takes a lot of, like, not practice, but a lot of adjust and then put it back, adjust, put it back. I must have screwed these things in 3 to 4 times before I got it just right, because you have to adjust it by undoing the servo door, because you can't actually screw this part in without getting the servo door out and then pulling the whole servo out and then hoping for the best every time you adjust it. That is what I did. I also cut away a little bit of the foam in there to allow the servos to move completely. You can't actually see it unless I was to put the throttle cut on and then pretend that the gear are up. So you see how much further they move than they used to because they have a longer arm on them. So it's a bit of an ugly solution, but it does work. And it works quite well, in fact. Hopefully this plane will get another 400 flights, but knowing the nature of foam, at some point something is going to structurally give way, and it's going to be spectacular when it does. But I'm hoping that I'm wrong, and I'm hoping it will continue to fly for a very long time, because I do take a lot of pride in my jets coming home safely almost every time I fly them. And aside from attempting high alpha incorrectly with my Viper at the wrong altitude and in the wrong way of doing it, I haven't had a wreck in any of my planes for pilot error or due to pilot error in 8 months since March. So I've got a pretty decent track record, and I'm sure there's guys who've flown longer without crashes, but I'm pretty proud of it, coming from a person who went through like 4 turbo timbers in the span of 3 months when I first got back into this hobby and had to relearn the hard way. I really hope this helps you guys out. I hope it gets you to see exactly what your Gripen is capable of doing. I'm sure there's more mixes you could do with this. For me, this is what I felt was appropriate. Ultimately, this is a really, really good aircraft. It does so many different things so well. And I need to take it back out to my the construction sites I've been flying at and just do some long touch and go practices on it. This is one of those planes that I know I can reliably keep in high alpha, and I know that due to the shape of the wing, I can keep it in that and all the way until landing, and I can make it land as light as a feather. Or if I really had to, given how strong these landing gear are, I could actually slam it into the pavement if I had to. But keep in mind, if you do add the air brakes, they are very effective. Very, very effective. They look incredible on the ground. I actually put them out when I'm taxiing. I just think it looks amazing to see the detail on them and the amount of decal work that Freewing put into them. And I love that. I mean, and again, my family was Swedish, and I just had to have the fighter jet of my people. So just like IKEA is the superstore of my people, I love this plane. I love every bit of it. And the design is just phenomenal. Saab knows what they're doing when it comes to making jets. All right, guys, I think this covers just about everything. As always, I will have the model files available for you. I'm actually going to have to boot up the iX12 to convert the file over to a DX compatible format, so you guys can work with that as well, for those of you with different or older radios, because this is just an 8-channel setup. So, you know, those of you who do have like an NX10 would be able to use this. It's not designed for something earlier than that, or with less channel control than that. You would definitely need something with more control to get the most out of this model. So again, this is John at CinRC. I hope you guys have a great rest of your evening, and I will see you guys with more uploads later on this week. Have a good one. Cheers.